ReviewTyme is the home for all things theme parks. Stay up to date with our videos by subscribing and tapping the bell icon. In 1989, Disney's new dream team of Michael Eisner and Frank Wells would declare the entire 1990s as the Disney Decade. 10 years dedicated to expanding the Disney company and bringing the magic of Disney to people in ways never before imagined. The Disney Decade should have been an incredibly exciting time to be a Disney theme park fan, with new resorts, new attractions and new parks all set to debut. However, sadly, most of these projects never came to fruition, and at some parks, over 90% of the officially announced Disney Decade plans and expansions would never make it off the announcement lectern. For ReviewTyme, I'm Luke, and this is a look at the failure of the Disney Decade. Hot off the heels of the blockbuster film The Little Mermaid, the Disney Decade was an aggressive 10-year expansion campaign throughout the 1990s that would see growth in every facet of the Disney company. The Disney Decade saw a great deal of success, building what is now known as the Renaissance of Disney animation, introducing Disney Vacation Club as a new way for superfans to experience a Disney resort vacation, and seeing the first sailings of the Disney Cruise Line, which brought the magic of Disney to the high seas. However, Eisner's habit of announcing things way before they should have been was running rampant in the 1990s, and nowhere was more promised and less delivered on than at Disneyland Park. For the 35th anniversary of Disneyland, a brand new TV special hosted by Harry Anderson and confusingly featuring the Back to the Future music was created. In the last few minutes of the special, viewers would get a sneak peek into the upcoming projects for the next 10 years of Disneyland. Now, let us take a quick look back at those almost 10 projects announced in the special and see how many of them actually made it into the park. 1991 would have started the Disney Decade off strong with a young Indiana Jones adventure spectacular stunt show, replacing Big Thunder Ranch. The show would have been a 30-minute long spectacle based on the success of the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular, which had just opened at Disney MGM Studios, as well as the box office smash of the third Indy film, where the beginning showed us the early life of this intrepid adventurer. Unlike the MGM Studios version of the show, this one wouldn't have focused on the movie-making aspect, and removed the stopping and starting for new scenes, and would have simply run straight through as a piece of theatre. The show would have begun with an older Indy reminiscing about his childhood. Guests would have then been taken back in time to see some of his younger adventures, with even the Disneyland Railroad getting in on the action, with the tracks being rerouted to run through the backmost portion of the staging area, allowing it to be used throughout the show, especially in a scene where young Indy would have run atop the rail cars to avoid captors, just like he did in the beginning of The Last Crusade. Of course, as this was meant to be the first addition to the Disney Decade for Disneyland, it was also the first thing officially cancelled. Disneyland Railroad cast members weren't a fan of disrupting the iconic attraction schedule just so it could be used as a show prop, and ultimately an Indiana Jones ride rather than this show would prove to be the winning idea. Eventually, people would get to experience the adventures of a younger Indy when George Lucas created the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles TV series that would debut on ABC in 1992. Today in the park, a small piece of the show that was to come can still be seen, with the white hearse parked in front of the Haunted Mansion, originally being purchased for the stunt show. The Young Indy performance wasn't the only new stage show meant to come to Disneyland in 1991, with an incredible live Muppet Show also scheduled to make its debut. This would have been different to Muppet Vision 3D, which would open the same year at Disney's MGM Studios. Whilst we don't know for sure, it was expected that this would be a copy of the Here Come the Muppet Show that debuted at MGM Studios in the same year. In the show, the Muppets were represented by giant walk-around fursuits, rather than the puppet styling guests would be used to. At MGM Studios, the attraction was designed as a temporary holdover until Muppet Vision 3D would open a few months later, and served to introduce the Muppets to the Disney guests, and starred Kermit trying to arrange a Muppets musical review, with some of the performers even crashing onto the scene in a hijacked monorail. 2 years later, in 1993, guests would have seen the first ride edition for the Disney decade with a brand new Little Mermaid attraction. This would have been a suspended dark ride similar to Peter Pan's Flight, where you would have climbed aboard a clamshell and journeyed under the sea, featuring similar scenes to the Little Mermaid dark ride we ultimately got in 2011 at DCA, but often in a more impressive way, including a much grander finale scene featuring a whirlpool and a giant Ursula animatronic, rather than just a cardboard cutout on a stick. 1993 was also the year a brand new land would open at Disneyland, and for once, and the only time in the decade, this project would actually come to fruition, when the Mickey's Toontown we still know and love today first opened, bringing to life the town where all of your favorite toons live, giving you the chance to meet Mickey in his house, explore Donald's boat, or even take a cartoon spin with Roger Rabbit. 1994 was meant to bring the biggest overhaul to Tomorrowland since 1967, with the incredible-looking Tomorrowland 2055, including, amongst other things, George Lucas's Alien Encounter. We have previously made a full video on the history of the sadly cancelled Tomorrowland 2055, but a brief synopsis is that the project would have brought a timelessness to Tomorrowland, finally fixing the classic issue where Tomorrowland quickly becomes Todayland, and even quicker, Pastland. The land would have taken inspiration from the grandiose Discovery Land at the recently opened Disneyland Paris, and featured a handful of new attractions including Plaku's fantastic intergalactic review and the extraterrestrial Alien Encounter. Sadly, this incredible proposal never got off the ground due to budgetary reasons, and instead we were left with an underwhelming brown space mountain for the Tomorrowland refurb of 1998. 1996 should have brought a brand new, groundbreaking attraction, Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers, based on the 1993 film that was expected at the time to be a huge hit. According to Disney, guests will literally get into the act in this new, high-tech action adventure, featuring the very latest in audio animatronics, simulation, sound, and special effects. The experience would have started as you boarded a 1920s-style car, before racing through Chicago, being chased and gunned down by gangsters. The attraction would have been a mix of two popular rides we know today, being both the original ride planning to use the enhanced motion vehicle ride system we now know from Indiana Jones and Dinosaur, as well as each vehicle containing Tommy guns for guests to shoot at various targets, causing all manner of special effects to happen. Technology that would eventually be utilized in Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger spin. Sadly, the Dick Tracy film was a critical and box office flop, immediately cancelling the plans for this incredible-looking attraction. Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers was meant to be the first attraction in a new major land for Disneyland Park called Hollywoodland, that would have opened a few years later in 1999, being the final planned expansion for the Disney decade. The land would have taken guests into an idealized version of Hollywood Boulevard, and included attractions such as a copy of the Great Movie Ride, as well as a brand new attraction entitled Baby Herman's Runaway Buggy Ride, based on the character from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The attraction would have taken guests on a tour of Maroon Studios, where they thought they were getting a behind-the-scenes look at the new Roger Rabbit cartoon Tummy Trouble, though you would soon learn that Baby Herman doesn't do all of his own stunts. and you would be enlisted to do them for him. Before long, you would find yourself in an oversized baby buggy, wearing a baby bonnet, zipping around hospital wards as you shot the stunt sequence for Tummy Trouble. At the end, you could even have bought the on-ride photo of you and your group in that giant baby buggy, wearing those giant baby bonnets. Outside of Disneyland Park itself, one of the biggest projects announced as part of the Disney decade that would ultimately become cancelled was the $3.1 billion Westcott, the original plans for Disneyland's second gate. Westcott would have been exactly what the name suggested, a West Coast version of Epcot Center, featuring both the Future World and World Showcase, containing original attractions as well as some plussed versions of Epcot Center favorites, all centered around the giant, impressive Space Station Earth park icon. Of course, Disneyland wasn't the only place around the world that was promised things that never materialized. Disney World would also see a number of cancelled projects across almost every park, including the Soviet Union and Switzerland pavilions for World Showcase at Epcot, the much-mourned mythical creatures land of Beastly Kingdom at Disney's Animal Kingdom, a park which would open during the Disney decade. It would be MGM Studios, though, that would see the most cancellations. A number of the rides cancelled for Disneyland were also originally planned and consecutively cancelled for this park too, including Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers, which here would have been placed in an elaborate Chicago-themed land, and Baby Herman's Runaway Buggy Ride, which would have been placed in a brand new land entitled Roger Rabbit's Hollywood. Located in the place of the current Sunset Boulevard, the land would have featured, as well as the previously mentioned buggy ride, a coaster, a simulator, and the attraction that ultimately became Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin. In the future, I'd love to make a more detailed look at Roger Rabbit's Hollywood, so if that's a video you would like to see, let us know in the comments section. Elsewhere in America, two huge theme park projects, including Port Disney at Long Beach in California and Disney's America in Haymarket, Virginia, were both officially announced and officially cancelled in the Disney decade. And this isn't to mention all of the other canned projects for Disney parks and resorts all over the world. As you can see, a lot was announced and quickly cancelled for the Disney decade all over the world. So why didn't these plans go ahead? Less than a year after the announcement of these plans, a number of them, including Hollywoodland, was already shelved, with Disneyland President Jack Lindquist saying, "Things are always in a state of flux at Disneyland." However, the two biggest roadblocks for the Disney decade were the financial failure of the Euro Disneyland Resort and the shock passing of president of the Disney Company and Eisner's right-hand man, Frank Wells. Both of these things turned Eisner from a creative into a worried penny pincher, and you can't exactly blame him. And this isn't to mention the number of attractions announced that simply wouldn't have worked in those specific parks, or were set to be based off films that turned out to be a massive flop. The failure of Disneyland Paris was a huge hit to the Disney Company, and one that would ripple throughout almost everything they would do for close to 15 years after the park debuted. Even past the Disney decade in the early 2000s, things such as Disney's California Adventure, Hong Kong Disneyland, and the Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris all received huge budget and creative cuts due to this failure of the Disney decade. Whilst the 90s was set up to be the ultimate years for all Disney theme park fans, sadly we now look back on them as the times where some of the best theme park projects died. Of course, it's almost expected to be negative towards Michael Eisner as a theme park YouTuber, but the Disney decade wasn't all misses and cancellations. The Disney Renaissance brought about some of, if not the best animated Disney films of all time, not that I'm biased at all as someone who grew up with them, as well as some now classic Disney attractions, such as the Indiana Jones Adventure and the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, Today, occasionally things are announced and then quietly cancelled not long later, such as the Main Street Theatre at the Magic Kingdom, but Disney seems to have learnt its lessons from Eisner and the failure of the Disney decade. For ReviewTyme, I'm Luke. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing.